Hello and welcome to From the BON, the Burnley podcast. And this week, no Burnley game, but there's plenty of football going on. In fact, one of the biggest games you could imagine. England's women's team in the World Cup final on Sunday against Spain. And we'll be looking later on at Burnley's women's team. But first, let's talk to somebody who's out there at the World Cup. Not only that, a Burnley-born person out there at the World Cup. Rachel Brown, who's out there with the BBC, former England international, 82 caps. And Rachel, it must be absolutely amazing out there. It looks amazing, the scenes we're seeing on television. What's it been like?
It's been unreal, actually, Simon. I came out as part of the BBC commentary team for the knockout stages. Managed to bring my two little children with me and my mother-in-law to help out with the logistics of commentary, as well as being here in Sydney for 2 weeks. And it's been unbelievable, the traction that the World Cup has had. I've seen it really come to life, from when I arrived 2 weeks ago and chatting to the taxi driver on the way in from the airport and not really knowing too much about the World Cup to where it was certainly last night when Australia played England in that momentous semi-final in front of a sellout crowd, record figures on the TV, not just here in Australia, but back at home as well. The viewing figures have been fantastic, just showing what appetite there is for this World Cup. It's been, I wouldn't say life-changing in some ways, because it's been the first time I've been able to bring the kids for them to remember it and to be part of it and to come to the games and wear the England shirts and be amongst all the England fans. But as much as Euro 22 was a game changer for women's football in our country in England, I feel like the same shift is happening here in Australia. And obviously being a part of women's football for such a long time, that makes me feel really proud of the sport worldwide.
I was going to say, I was lucky enough to be in Canada in 2015 and France in 2019, and each time it seemed like it had got bigger and bigger. I know you were in France as well. I remember talking to you in Lyon before the final there. Do you feel that it's gone up a notch, like globally as well, not just on site? Because obviously Australia's gone Matilda mad, or until yesterday they had anyway. But do you feel like globally it's just stepping up every tournament?
Yeah, with the coverage that's happened and the sort of each time there's been a platform for women's football, I guess, to be showcased, there seems to have been a bigger and bigger appetite each time. And like you said, in Canada 2015, England got to the semi-final and then won the bronze medal, and that was a moment in history for the team. Again, 2019 got to a semi-final and then fell short in that under Phil Neville. But now the difference is, certainly from an England perspective, is that Sarina Wiegman, she was brought in by the FA and she's one of the world's best managers. She's the missing link with regards to managers from an England perspective. We've never had a manager who's won anything before, who's come in to kind of lead us to that next level. And certainly Sarina Wiegman has got everything on her CV, on her credentials, and from a historical perspective. But you see it game in, game out, the tactical changes, the decisions, the preparation that it seems that she has from a backroom staff, and also that they've implemented not just on the field, as live, but what they've prepared for, coming up against different teams, changing formations. There's not something we saw in the Euros, but something that, when in this tournament, England have played against a team from every single continent. And with that, in a World Cup, you play against different styles, you play against players who pretty much, this is their one time to be showcased. And with that, it's a little unknown at times. But you feel like we are the best prepared team, even when you look at the last 16 game against Nigeria. We went down to 10 players. We had to then quickly change to formation, to sit in and play out for penalties. And then when it came to penalties, you saw that how prepared England were, even down to how quickly they set out on the halfway line and set their line up. All those little games that you see the very best teams, the teams that have won things before, that's the things that they do. They're the things that we're now doing. And that makes me, whets my appetite for the final and makes me believe that we can do it because we've got the best infrastructure, we've got the best preparation. And also we've got, a group of players who have got the experience of the Euros, they've got the experience of having lost in a semi-final at a World Cup. And we've got a really good kind of bridge of experienced players and younger players coming in who can do the job. They've shown different ways of having to do the job, and they've done the job. They've won every single game in this tournament. And it makes me really excited for Sunday's final.
Rachel, I think for a lot of Burnley fans, they will have come across your name at first during your playing days, in the early days of your playing career, by reading the Burnley Express and Chris Bowden's articles, where he tracked your career really at every stage you were playing for England. So I'm going to hand over to our Chris because he's got some questions, of course.
I said it's you look at what's going to take place on Sunday, and you look back at sort of the hardships that you had to go through to even play the game, didn't you? I think you tried to play in the Sunday League, didn't you? And as a like 12, 13-year-old girl, and people were saying, no, you can't have girls playing in a men's game, etc. And you're trying to find a club to harness your ability. I mean, what was it like in those early stages?
Yeah, I remember my first sort of ever piece in the paper was playing for Bangor United in the boys team. And I was interviewed during the match because we were winning about 10-0, and I was stood in goal. And there's a picture of me stood in goal, kind of propped up against the goalpost in a boys team. And that's just how it was. And I remember going then to secondary school at St Christopher's in Accrington, and suddenly being told you can't play mixed football. And I was thinking, well, why? I just want to play football, and that was the rules then. And I joined Accrington Stanley Ladies, so I was 12 years old and playing in a ladies team. So it's amazing how things have moved on, how things have completely developed. And, reference now, I've got a 7-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old son, and how they're watching football now is they look at football as being for everybody. They don't see it as a men's sport, a girls' sport. They don't think, oh, a girl's playing football, that's a novelty. They just think, well, everyone can play football, and that's such a refreshing and rewarding kind of yardstick, really, as to where football is. Because football should be for everybody, whether you've got a disability, whether you're male, whether you're female, whatever background you're from a kind of monetary or economic point of view, religious point of view. Football can be enjoyed by everyone from literally across the world. I've now I'm an old lady. I've joined a golf club, and even all my 60-year-old golf friends, they were dancing in their front room and sending me videos of them enjoying and watching the Lionesses win the semi-final. And so it's really kind of the traction, the number of people, and I think the spread of people. People who've never watched football before, from the Euros last summer and to this summer now, certainly the Lionesses have got to the final. Everybody's part of it. Everybody's able to enjoy it, whether they're into football, whether they follow a team, whether they've played football ever before. Everybody has a little bit of reason to want to follow the Lionesses, and I think that's ever more powerful. We follow Burnley, for forever, and we love Burnley, but sometimes that's been exclusive, and that's not just Burnley. That's all men's football teams. It's excluded a lot of people, and that's just the nature of the sport and how it's developed. But the fact that women's football has become front face and it's been on TV, everybody's talking about it. It's bringing a lot of new people to that environment, and certainly now I've got children and being able to have them part of football, not just here in Sydney, but as part of football and enjoying football. I think that's really, really refreshing.
Yeah, I mean, you go back. I mean, sort of look at when you were 15, you're playing for Liverpool, but it wasn't the Liverpool that we know now in terms of the women's team, and it wasn't the cup final in terms of what we know. I think it was on a cable channel that nobody had heard of, and you'd struggle to get hold of it. But now, even that, we're playing at Wembley Stadium. There's 80,000 there. It's just a different ball game altogether, isn't it?
It is entirely, Chris. You're right. I think it was on UK Living. Was that final in 1996? But I was at school still then. I was at secondary school playing for Liverpool, and you're right. Liverpool was the name of the club, but we weren't in any way attached to the men's team. I went down at the weekend, played an FA Cup final, and then went back to school on the Monday. So much has changed from those early days, and it's always been a real source of pride that Burnley, and particularly you, Chris, has followed my career from being very, very young, then out to America when I went and lived and went to university over there to pursue football, and then being in the England team from then on, and seeing how England's developed, how my football's developed through that. It's been always a privilege to always tie it back to Burnley, because that's where it all started. St Stephen's Primary School was where I first got the chance to play in a team. And I'm very, very proud that I come from Burnley, that my parents still live there, that I can come back and, wax lyrical about those grounding moments of being able to start football, but also seeing how, Burnley FC women's team has really, really developed, how the academy or the ETC, the various names that they've changed, the sort of youth system has brought through lots and lots of players. So all of that, it's not a personal kind of sense of privilege or pride that I feel. It's a general sense that it's been for the betterment of thousands of people, if not millions, not just for me. So, and that's the same with this World Cup. If England go on to win it, it makes history, and that makes me feel so, so proud of everyone who's ever been involved in women's football, including you, Chris.
Your generation, but was it fair to say, you pretty much had to go to America to further your career? Nowadays you might come through an academy at Manchester City and you do it that route, but to improve yourself, you had to go to the States.
Exactly that. I was at Nelson & Cone College, and I got the opportunity to go off to America. And I wanted to go to university because football was not a professional career. It was a hobby. I was playing for England, playing for Liverpool, but made no money at all from football. That was never my underlying drive to want to play football. I just played it because I loved it. And but you're right, at that point, going to America, the US women's national team were the best in the world. So to go there and get my degree, play football every day was just something that I couldn't have wanted anything more than to play football every day. I felt like a professional because I was doing all the training programs and I was playing for England, but we weren't professional. We weren't paid. We were training 2 or 3 times a week. And that showed. As a national team, we weren't very good as far as the ranking. And I remember being in America, and as I said, training at Alabama, playing for Alabama, University of Alabama, transferred up to the University of Pittsburgh. But in 1999, went and got the chance to go and watch the World Cup final. So that iconic moment where Brandon Chastain whipped off a shirt and did a knee slide after the sort of penalty shootout. And I can't believe that I was there. I was there watching that and thinking, I remember thinking, like, these are superstars. These are like millionaires. These are front page newspaper iconic female athletes. And, they are in some sense my peers, but they seem so far away, so untouchable from a national team point of view. And there's a couple of us out at university in America at the time doing, for the same reasons as I was, likes of Kelly Smith were out there. And we came back with a renewed sense of energy that we wanted some of that. We'd seen, the kind of iconic status that these players had. And we didn't want that for us personally, but we wanted our sport to be recognised in a similar light to how theirs was. And, I think only now after winning the European Championships and being on the precipice of winning a World Cup, we truly are, that football is seen as a sport for anybody. And that was the biggest sense that I got in America, was that football wasn't a boys or a girls sport, it wasn't a women's or a men's sport, it was just football. And I feel like we're really getting there. And that makes me, that's been a long journey, but, all of those kind of poignant crossroads and moments that I've experienced have been part of what we see today.
There's been interesting debate in the States since they got eliminated in this tournament, where it's a bit more. It's a bit more than a post-mortem. I think there's a sort of sense of that it's the end of an era for soccer in America, for women soccer, in the sense that they dominated for so long, obviously, in so many competitions, Olympics and World Cups, and they've realised that the rest of the world has caught up now. Because it's not just one or two teams either, is it? It's they pretty much struggled in every game that they played, and the interest in football came from other countries, really. Do you think that they need to now look at the game around the world and realise that maybe they need to change the way they do things, having been the pioneers in so many ways?
The whole system in America has just been so exemplary to so many others. And, that stems from the university system, and they produce professional basketballers, professional American footballers, professional MLS players, professional women's soccer players. Every sport that we see, American sport that we see on our TVs, most of those players are products through the university system. So it's really been hard to compete with that. And that's why the likes of me and others went off to America, because that was the best case scenario for players of our age. And you're right, everyone's caught up, and they've not done it the same way. I think what the FA did 12 years ago now in developing the Women's Super League, they didn't just replicate the professional league in America. They did it their own way. They looked at the marketing strategies. They looked at clubs here in England, as in sort of the men's clubs, the Big Brother side of the clubs, and looked at how we could integrate like women's football into men's football and just be kind of one club. And I think after the European Championship success last summer, we saw games at the Emirates, games at the Etihad, games at Stamford Bridge, games at Old Trafford, for domestic games I'm talking about. That's something that we've not seen before. And not only games at, the Emirates with, a handful of people, games that were sold out. And hopefully that's like a blueprint of things to come. And we've already seen that Chelsea women have already put out that there's going to be at least 4 games that are already in the calendar at Stamford Bridge. So yes, USA have been caught up, but different countries have done it their own way. But they've looked at, the standard. They have been the pioneers for the standard of international football, winning World Cups, what it takes to win World Cups. And players like us who've been out and worked alongside Americans have seen those characteristics that it's taken to breed that winning mentality. And we've taken bits from living and playing in that league, and we've learnt from how they feel, because English people and American people think in a different way. I could play for England, which I did, and there'd be an American equivalent who never played for the national team, but you think how they talked, how they bigged themselves up, that they were a better player than me. That's just their mentality, but right. on a performance level, actually, we had to learn from that, because being that fine balance of arrogance and self-belief, it is a fine balance. And when you're looking at a professional athlete, you've got to really have a huge amount of self-belief that you can go out and perform and be, the sort of the best version of what you can be. Now, whether that collectively becomes a team that can beat the likes of the US, but you can learn from those characteristics. And if you can drive performance levels, which we have continued to do, certainly in the national team and across the WSL, there's a lot of things we've learned from them. I think the US women's national team have maybe tipped that balance in arrogance over self-belief, and it was certainly in this World Cup maybe their undoing.
Chris?
I can remember sort of, speaking to you sort of in the early days, and England were, I mean, it was an achievement to qualify for a Euros, to qualify for a World Cup, and now you sort of like the mentality is setting out the plan, the process to go and win the thing, isn't it? You know, it's a whole different sea change, really. It's you know, in the space of sort of 20 years, it's just gone full course, hasn't it?
There's been a few key people at the FA who've continued to kind of bang that drum and to drive change. And you're right, when I joined, when I was first part of the England setup, and when we first got our first full-time head coach, Hope Powell, there was Hope Powell, there was Kelly Simmons, and there was Rachel Pavlo, 3 people who were the only full-time members of staff who were solely driving women's football. And I'm not just talking about like the senior national team, I'm talking about all of women's football. And, you know, you hear it in Sydney and you've got probably more full-time members of staff who are there to drive the performance of women's football than there are players. But that has been 25, if not more years of investment, of mindset change, because there are a lot of people at the FA, and they know that, who weren't on board with pushing women's football. There were a lot of people who needed to kind of be moved to one side, who had, you know, we talk about the dinosaur mentality that was there. And I've seen it, I've heard it, I've endured it, and I'm glad that, you know, those people who actively want to drive participation, performance levels in women's football are now in place at the FA. The fact that they're doing it properly, the fact that they've invested resources in youth football, grassroots football, in when I say youth football, I mean like under 15s, 17s, 19s, all the different age groups of international football, which again, when I started playing for England, I went straight in at the senior team because there wasn't any youth teams. So from 97, when I made my debut, to where we are now, there's just been the most seismic changes in the infrastructure of elite level football, but also in grassroots level football. And it makes me so proud that, you know, there's millions of girls and women who are now taking up the sport of football because they can, you know, because so many years ago they didn't take up football because they couldn't. And so it's a huge, huge change.
If you think, I think I remember you telling me in China in 2007. I think you didn't have a dietitian or a chef or anything like that. I was saying sort of girls were nipping off to McDonald's, you know, to get, you know, a nicer meal and things like that. It was that's how things have changed, I suppose, as well.
Yeah, 2007 was our first World Cup under since the FA took over in '95. So we've been in the World Cup in '95, but that was, you know, pre FA rulership. So it took, you know, I mean, gosh, it was 10 years of being an England player before we qualified for a World Cup, which seems ridiculous nowadays. You know, you've got like the likes of Alessia Russo, Ella Toon, a lot of them, their first World Cup, and they're on the brink of winning it. But that wasn't always the case. So yes, you're right. We had a physio, we had a doctor, and that was pretty much it. We had an assistant coach, a goalkeeper coach, and you know, not all of those were full time either. So to get to a World Cup and to get through to the quarterfinals at that point, it was a historic moment to have qualified for that World Cup, and such a proud moment, and one that all of us involved in that were sort of like so proud of. But do you know what? I met up with in the fan park here in Sydney a few former players, the likes of Pauline Cope, who was the England goalkeeper before, you know, she was the goalkeeper who started when I came into the England squad. She was here, and she just said like how much things have changed has been unbelievable. And I met up with Kelly Smith and Farrah Williams tonight, and Alex Scott, and all of us who basically have lived life before professional football, have lived life before kind of qualifying for World Cups, who've then been on that kind of journey of change, and then are now on the other side of it from a media perspective, still in it and still enjoying it and still being able to be part of that huge enjoyment and sense of pride of where we potentially could be in winning a World Cup.
You can see, I mean, you're pretty close with the girls now, aren't you? I saw you know, the pictures with Mary Earps and things like that. There's a real bond there, isn't there, with the past and the present?
Yeah, and it was lovely to hear, certainly in the Euros, about a couple of years ago, the FA rolled out a legacy programme so that every female player who played for England was recognised with a legacy number. And that has really brought the whole Lioness family together. Whereas, most England players who finished went on to then, say like yesterday you finished playing for England, tomorrow you start full time as a dinner lady or as a postal worker or as a physio or as a teacher. That is, most of my friends do full time jobs outside of football, exactly in the sort of jobs I've talked about. The likes of, I was saying, myself and Farah, those who are here covering the World Cup, feel so privileged to be in that position, but also, like you said, in the European Championships, there was a lot of talk of, this is for all of the Lionesses that have come before them, having won that, to have gotten them to that point. And that was only a year ago. And the likes of, Lucy Bronze and Mary Earps, who, I've been in squads with for years, recognise that and understand what it was pre-professional football, which is, just a few years ago. So there's still that very surface level recognition of everything that went beforehand, everything that's taken to get to this point. And that certainly, there's a tear in my eye when we got to the final on Wednesday.
I bet there was. But I mean, even things like, Mary was saying before the tournament, she's saying, why are you not selling my goalkeeper shirt, Nike? But you had to wear the men's jersey, didn't you, basically? The huge...
Yeah. Oh, I did. I remember I got pretty much David Seaman double XL. The sort of like... that red shirt that had like this sort of yellow and green and purple and different colours on it. And I was like, why the hell have I got a double XL shirt? And they're like, well, it's from the men's team. You're like, all right, nice one. I mean, you get loads of signatures on it, but it certainly has changed since then. And you're right. And people like Mary Earps and players who are, as I said, about to, whether it's the Spain team, whether it's the England team, about to win a World Cup, they should be pushing for better. And the fact that Mary Earps shirt's still not on sale, no Nike goalkeeper shirt in a women's fit is available. When, I know I'm biased, but I think the goalkeeping in this tournament has been absolutely unprecedented. Mackenzie Arnold for Australia saving penalties to get them through to the semi-final. Number of player of the matches that have been for the goalkeepers, with Van Domselaar from the Dutch team, Musovic, who got Sweden through to the semi-final with a string of amazing saves. It does seem a little I'm a bit dumbfounded by those strategic decisions by the hierarchy at Nike, which it seems to be predominantly. Because when you look at Manchester United and the Adidas sponsor, from what I read, Mary Earps was the third most sold shirt across from Manchester United, both men's or women's. So, off the back of the Euros win, the third most sold shirt is pretty impressive. Albeit, Man United didn't have the best season, the men's team, but Mary Earps was the star of the show and still is. So, yeah, sort it out, Nike.
You talk about the sort of like the goalkeeper performances, and just in terms of like the evolution of goalkeepers in general. I mean, your thoughts on sort of goalkeepers. We almost look at them more as, in terms of their football ability, as other than the ability to keep the ball out of the net. You look at, Aro Muric that won everyone over at Burnley last year, and James Trafford's a similar type. But what are your thoughts in terms of that conversation?
It's modern goalkeeper in football, and that's men's and women's. That's just football. It's the ability to play out from the back, to be comfortable with the ball at your feet, and we've got that. We've seen that in the World Cup. We've seen that, like you said, James Trafford. I think it's a brilliant signing for Burnley. was absolutely fantastic in the summer for England, and certainly one for now and for the future. I can see him being a world-class goalkeeper, and certainly a Premier League class goalkeeper for a long time to come for the rest of his career. And it does take that, but it takes years of kind of that honing that skill. You don't just kind of like, right, we're going to play out from the back this season and be brilliant at it. You know, it's going to take time, but with regards to standard of goalkeeping at the World Cup, it's the best it's ever been, 100%. We get that because, you know, in every country that's been represented at the World Cup, and you've got to remember it's moved to 32 teams, this Women's World Cup, for the first time ever. Before that's been 24, so you're expecting some potentially dismal goalkeeping, some really one-sided games, some, you know, gaffes, some really poor teams. There's been none of that. Every team that's been a kind of debutant has not looked out of place, and it's been, you know, for me, loving analysing goalkeeping, it's been unreal to be able to unpick, you know, how a goalkeeper's made a save rather than why they've made a gaff, and it's you know, to be able to articulate that, actually break down, you know, how because you've got to remember as well, the average height of the goalkeeper in the World Cup is about 5'9". We're not 6'2", we're not 6'3". So how you make those top corner saves is actually slightly different to how you make it if you're 6'2" or 6'3". Your positioning's got to be slightly kind of cuter. It's got to be slightly. If you're making, say, a point blank save, you've actually got to gamble and be a bit further down the line, because then you cover more of the goal. And with that, you've got to have better reaction better reaction time. So how we train as goalkeepers, being an average height of 5'8", 5'9", is slightly different to how male goalkeepers in the Premier League or further down the leagues would train. It's not a disadvantage. It's just a slightly different way of training to be able to make those saves.
Yeah, it's fascinating. But it's in terms of sort of the, you know, looking ahead to Sunday, and the big day, you know, they've got to go out and win it again. But to have got where they've got without you know, the captain, you know, and Beth Mead, one of the best players in the world over the last few years, and then you lose Kira Walsh for a game or two, and you lose Lauren James, and they've managed to adapt every step. It's almost like a German-Italian. You know, the way that they've gone through, and they've got better every game. They've shrugged off all the challenges and just one more to overcome.
I think having the best manager in the world helps keep things steady, keep mentality steady when other teams or potentially individuals might panic, think, oh, we've lost our best player. Lauren James, like you said, was starring in the tournament, and you know, then shows her naivety and her immaturity to do what she did. Available for the final. We'll see what happens, whether she'll start or not. As you mentioned, losing Leah Williamson back in March, I think it was, so soon to the tournament, was never going to be back. Beth Mead, who was the top scorer in the European Championships. You know, we felt if we took the European Championships team to this World Cup, you feel confident in winning it, but we didn't. We were far from it. And I think a lot of people thought we're not anywhere near as confident that England could go on and win it. But what they have proved, every single game, every single task that they come up against, the likes of Haiti, you know, you wouldn't, looking at their ranking, you'd have thought England would have absolutely battered them. Haiti were like outstanding. They posed so many problems, and it was, you know, a clutch save from Mary Earps. You know, retaken penalty from Georgia Stanway that we scraped through. But what England have shown, where they may be down in quality on what we might have expected from the European Championships and how we swept through the Euros to go on and win it, they have been tested in different ways. Their character, their resolve, their ability to apply different tactics, not just building up to a game, but partway through games as well, has been absolutely exemplary. They've drawn on every experience that they've had as individuals. They've also drawn on the collective belief that they have in Serena Wiegman and the tactics and preparation that she's had. I've seen, like, I think we were talking just before the show, when Lauren James got sent off, going down to 10 players, there was a scenario planned for that by Serena Wiegman. I saw before the VAR decision was even looked at and overturned, she brought Lucy Bronze and Millie Bright over to the sideline to tell them, look, we think Lauren James is going to get sent off. This is how we're going to set up. So there was no blip. There was no settling in process. You know, when the game was restarted, they were already set in 4-4-1. Everybody knew what they needed to do. They knew they were going to ride it out for penalties, knew that they were better prepared than Nigeria to execute those penalties, and got through that game. So every game has posed a different test, and England have rose to that test. That's whether that's resources, because you look at the base camp. I've been up to the base camp and I've looked around and seen everything that's there, and they have everything that they need to prepare to recover in between games, to relax. Families are over and are here, which is really important and forms a big part of a lot of players' preparation and being kind of mentally ready for games. It's all there for them. So all they've had to do is go out and perform on the day. And the final on Sunday is, I hope, another example of no stone being left unturned in preparing to do the one thing that is left to do, and that's lift that World Cup.
Yeah, and obviously, you know, the Spain game from last summer's fresh in the memory as well, and that was an epic as well. You'd imagine something along those lines on Sunday? Yeah,
I think it's going to be tight. Like the Jorge Vilda, the manager for Spain, it isn't liked. There's been a lot of preamble to this tournament. The players wrote a letter to the federation, which was then published by the federation. It was meant to be private, but was published by them. So there's a lot of discord, is what I mean, in the squad. There's several players who have, stood by that letter of standing now for the national team and are not here at the World Cup because of that. Several players who've reinstated themselves because, it's a World Cup, and you want to, if you've got one chance at playing a World Cup, you kind of want to put your indifferences with the coach to one side to be able to do that and to win it for your country. But certainly not everything's great within the squad of Spain. But as you said, Euro 2022, that was the closest game that we had in the whole of the tournament. But the final was a close one. But Spain, whoa! I mean, I remember the commentator next to me was saying, "We're not going to do it. We're not going to do it." And I was like, "Shut up, Robin." I was like, "We are going to do it. Like we've got another level. We can get back in this." And we did. But they pulled like Salma Paraguayo, who's a 18-year-old Barcelona product, has come on and scored the winner in the last two games, I think it is. As well as they have Alexia Putellas, who's a world superstar, back. Yeah. She got ACL injury just before the Euros, so not unavailable. So they have firepower. They're not in the final just by luck. It's going to be right to the wire. I can see it going all the way to extra time, if not penalties.
And there'll be tears if it goes the right way.
It'd be tears either way, I think, from me.
I'd say I could only imagine. I mean, just looking, obviously, I think Burnley ladies opened their league season on the same day. Obviously, I'm sure there'll be ways of them watching the final before they play, etc. But I can only imagine sort of the one thing making you prouder would be to see maybe in the future sort of Burnley advance up those levels and create an England international, from the Burnley ladies setup. That'd be something to shout about.
Well, that's it. Any girl from Burnley, previously, of course, they've had Burnley women to play for, but they've not had an academy. They've had to go to Blackburn Rovers, or they've had to go to Liverpool or to Everton. That's what needs to happen to produce the best from Burnley. And I would love. I don't want to be the only international from Burnley. I would love to see that be kind of commonplace, that first of all, every girl, as per the Lionesses legislation they put in place from winning the Euros, that every girl has equal opportunity to play at junior school. And I think that should be a given nowadays. Physical differences are minimal at junior school level, and there's no reason why girls can't play football or be given the opportunity to play football if they want to. And that only grows the pool. If you never know that you're really good at football, you'll never, kind of get on that pathway. It's the same with any sport. I remember going to the Olympics in 2012 and thinking, how on earth do you get into like canoe slaloming or kind of like, fencing?
Pole vault.
But that's it. How would you know you're dead good at pole vaulting unless you're given a chance? And it's the same for girls in football, particularly girls, because, there hasn't always been that same opportunity. And I would love more than anything for Burnley to continue their one club mentality, for it to become ultimately aligned and in the Championship, and then maybe onto the Women's Super League. And ultimately to have an England player come from Burnley would almost make me feel like probably a proud grandma at that time.
Well, we're going to get on to looking in a bit of detail about what Burnley are doing. We've got Lola Ogunbote, the head of women's football at Burnley, coming on to join us later in the show. But I just want to say thanks very much, Rachel, for giving up so much time while you're out there in Australia. I know it's difficult to get time to do things like this, so we really, really appreciate it. It's been great to hear you and Chris talking together, and hopefully we'll return on the podcast sometime and talk some more football.
Yeah, bit of a start for Burnley for the men, 3-0, not to be expected. Bit of a write-off that first game. It was a good one to tee off the season. Disappointed that Luton game can't go ahead, but absolutely delighted to see them back in the Premier League. And like you said, going back to the women, to see Lola in place, I met her a couple of times now. It's moving in the right direction, and I'm really proud of everything. Certainly that first game at Turf Moor was history, and I've known that the first time is always like the hardest and most difficult moment to get to, but after that first time it opens the door and it always makes the next one easier.
We'll all be listening to you on Sunday. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I hope those tears are tears of joy. Thanks very much, Rachel.
Indeed. And thank you, Chris, for always being there for me and with me. I appreciate it, and I'll never forget that.
Oh, absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks to Chris, Simon, and of course Rachel for that. And don't forget, you can listen to Rachel's commentary on the Women's World Cup final on Sunday. Coverage starts at 10 a.m. UK time on BBC One. Now, Simon also sat down with Burnley Football Club's head of women's sport, Lola Ogunbote, to find out a little bit more about the club's plans for the women's team ahead of their season opener on Sunday.
So, Lola, when we look at the women's programme at Burnley Football Club, we've seen a lot of changes since Alan Pace and the new ownership group came into the club. Could you sort of sum up where the women's setup was when the group took over and where it's been going?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a whirlwind for the past 2 years, if I'm honest, Simon. So we had AOK take over 2 seasons ago. Prior to their takeover, the women's team sat under the community, very much in the shadows, but still being taken care of. They'd had back-to-back promotion from lower tiers up until they got to tier 3. So under really limited resources, did really, really well. We then had the takeover. Alan made it very clear that one of his priorities was to create a women's team that would sit under the club, that would have more of a professional outfit than it ever did. And so we were tasked with making changes. I was hired for a start, and that was, I think, one of the first steps is who's going to lead the charge in trying to move this women's team in the right direction. And it was, a long chat with Alan in terms of what his vision was. And I quickly knew that he was being serious, and it wasn't about lip service to the women's team, but more actual action. So those steps include, making sure that we have pre-match meals, making sure we have the right staffing. So a head coach, an assistant, a physio, a nutritionist, a club psych, goalkeeper coach, an analyst, all of that around the players, making sure that the players were able to be paid. Some of them are contracted. That was the first time we'd done that as a club for some of our players, ensuring that they could travel to and from training and not in their own cars, to kind of take off that stress and fatigue, make sure we had a good venue. So we play at the Lancashire FA, which arguably is probably one of the best venues in our league. So all of these things to help in the first step of professionalising what we hope to be a successful women's team going forward.
And the team actually train most of the time or all of the time at the same facility as the men now, yeah? Is that right?
Yeah, we have access to the training ground. So our gym sessions are here, our pre-match meals are here, our analysis are here. It's not uncommon to see the players in and around the building. We do have our own private facility that we train on, which sits across the road from the training ground. So we have a private college that we have access to for sessions, and we also have we had most of our pre-match and pre-season games here at Barnfield as well. So there's definitely a lot more integration than there's ever been in the club's history, and there probably is still more that is in the works to come, but we've made exceptional progress up until now.
So the team at the moment, for those who don't follow the women's team's fortunes, the team at the moment are in the third tier of the English women's structure. Yes, so promotion this team season would, if that was successful, put the women's team into the equivalent of the men's championship. Yeah, is that a fair description?
Yeah. If you were to do it like for like, you've got the WSL, which is akin to the Premier League. You have the Championship, which is akin to the Championship, and then Tier 3, which would probably be akin to League One. So in terms of where we want to be in the WSL. But before we can get that far, we need to get promoted into the Championship. So that's absolutely our ambition as a club this season, is to secure promotion.
And where are the players coming from? Because traditionally, I remember when the team trained at Nelson and Colne College, and it was near where I lived, and I used to wander to the pub down the corner and see the players, coming out of training. I'm guessing that maybe the net is spread a little bit further than just. I know there are still players from the Burnley area on the team, but has the net been spread further in the sort of search for talent to get up to the higher levels? Yeah,
absolutely. We've seen and been able to attract talent from all over the country. Obviously, Burnley is in the northwest, and it's a specific area, but we have players travelling. I've got a player that travels in from Wales. I've got players that travel in from Sheffield. I've got a player that has moved up from Leicester. I've got players that are in and around Manchester and Blackburn and those surrounding areas. So yeah, it's we're definitely diverse in where people are coming from. We're able to attract that talent, I believe, because of what we're doing and how we're trying to get that journey to the top going. So a lot of interest this season, and that was reflected in the recruitment process. In my first season, I think I put out an ad for a head coach. I had 35 applicants, 2 of which were women. This season, when we did our ad, we had 75 applicants, 10 of which are women. So you can just see that excitement, that growth, that interest shows that, for me as well, an indication that we're moving in the right direction and attracting the right talent, more importantly.
Yeah, and tell us a little bit about the new manager, because that's a fairly recent appointment,
yeah? Yeah, Rebecca Savuk is our new manager, and just delighted with her appointment. She has extensive experience in the game, has coached in academy in PDP, has coached in the Championship previously, has coached with the national team, under 19s, is just well versed in knowing how to manage and lead a squad. And so that experience, coupled with the fact that she is driven, hardworking, and a winner, wants to win, was the deciding factor in appointing her. And she's relocated, she's got straight onto the ground, and is busy, and she's got a fantastic squad that are ready to kind of play the new way under her.
I mean, in many ways, the women's game now is not that dissimilar for the men's, in the sense that if you want to get into the WSL, you do have to invest quite a lot and the transfer market exists. We're seeing top players, many of the players who are playing in this World Cup and producing this brilliant football that everyone's enjoying are already playing in the WSL. They've been signed by the big clubs, which are the same big clubs that we look at in the Premier League as well. Yeah. So is there a plan for further investment, or is it something that has to sort of evolve a little bit more organically?
There's always a plan for further investment, and Alan is somebody who has big visions, big plans for the women's team. He's also someone that understands, as do I, that things take time and need to be done pragmatically and not just for the sake of everybody else is doing it, we're going to do it that way. You've seen that with the way that Finnis and company recruited last season, and there was a lot of talk around, is it too much, is it not? And it proved to be his way, and that was the right way. And I would definitely say that we're in the same position. We are going to do it the right way, but we're going to do it the Burnley way. And so, yes, there are ambitions to get to the WSL. Yes, there is funding available to get us there, but we're not going to rush. We're going to do it in a way that's going to make us sustainable. That means we're going to stay up there, and it means it's going to be competitive. And so that might take a bit longer than we just want to get there overnight.
I mean, in terms of fans being able to support the team, I mean, the Lancashire FA facility at Leyland is an excellent facility for the players, but it's a little bit inconvenient for fans from the Burnley area, isn't it? I mean, it's not miles away, but it's not next door either. Are there any plans to play some showcase games at Turf Moor or do something to maybe engage the fans in a different way?
Yeah, we're absolutely wanting to make sure that as many Burnley fans are able to watch and support the women's team. I think one of the things that you highlight correctly is the Lancashire FA is a fantastic facility. And so one of the key markers for us trying to get to that level is to ensure that the women's team have access to the best facilities. Now, in Burnley, we are trying to make sure that we can access and get collaboration with venues and try and even make a plan long term to see if we can bring the women's team back to Burnley.
Right.
Definitely the conversations we're having. It's definitely what I want. It's what the club wants. We want to be in Burnley. We want to play. We want the town to come and watch us. But for the time being now, there isn't a stadium that fits criteria. And a lot of people are unaware that there is a criteria. If we're going to go to the Champions, it has to have A grade criteria. And some of the places that have been thrown out, or you can play here, you can play here. Yes, we could, but it wouldn't meet the criteria for us to get into the Championship. So what we're trying to do is try and see if there are existing stands that we could perhaps help to get to that criteria, or if there's the option to try and do something here at Turf Moor or at Barnfield. So those plans, like planning permission, all of that stuff takes a while. But those conversations are absolutely happening. In terms of playing at Turf Moor, that will happen, not just as a showcase, but because it is what the ownership want. And so I'm excited. We did that at the back end of last season for the very first time in our history, and it was a fantastic occasion. And so the ownership want that. They want more of that. They want more fans through the door. And so that will absolutely happen this season as well.
Yeah, it's a tricky one for a lot of clubs, isn't it? The venue, even like the very biggest Premier League clubs, they play at grounds that aren't the same as their men's team, and sometimes it's too big of a leap in terms of capacity and all the rest of it. It is a tricky one. It's interesting what you say about the Barnfield as an option, because that's kind of the way Manchester City have gone. I know they've got the convenience that they've got the training ground right next to the stadium as well, but that is quite a nice setup they've got there, isn't it? I mean, there are different models, I suppose.
Yeah, I think with Man City, the luxury they had was foresight, whereas everybody else has had hindsight. So when you think of a club like Burnley, founded way back when, I don't know that they ever could have imagined or foreseen that they would one day have to.
Exactly, yeah.
Whereas with the newer money, which is what we would term clubs like your Man Cities, they were forward planning. They were able to say, actually, we can do academy women's all here, because it wasn't something that they were thinking about, retrospectively. So, I'm sure at the right time, and if it is possible, we would love to do that. But we've also got to make sure that it works from a logistics perspective. We've got to make sure we get planning permission. There's so many conversations that need to happen before we can say we're just going to erect a building and build it here. If it was that simple, we would have done it yesterday. But sadly, we've got to make sure that we're compliant. We back onto a national trust. So there's a lot of a lot of conversations that need to happen before we can just, say, yeah, we want to build a building. But that's something that we are discussing for sure.
Yeah, parking's never been easy at that part of facility. In terms of this World Cup at the moment, I mean, there's just such an incredible level of excitement around the Lionesses, and obviously, if they go and win the World Cup this weekend, it's going to be another boom that's probably going to be much, much bigger than even the Euros, which kicked off so many interesting initiatives.
Yeah.
Do you think that Burnley are well placed to sort of capture that enthusiasm?
Yeah. I mean, just as a starter, we are going to be live streaming the game at the fan zone at Turf Moor, free entry. Try and get as many people to watch the Lionesses on Sunday as possible. For us, women's football remains a priority. We know that the Euros had such a lasting effect, and to even think about, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, but to think about doing the Euros back with a World Cup for women's football would be phenomenal for England. Such rich sport in footballing history, for the women's team to be able to do that, would be unbelievable. So we're all excited. We're trying to make sure that we're not getting ahead of ourselves, but it looks like it could happen. And I don't want to jinx it, but we're all ready and raring to get behind the team. And I know that will increase conversations back here if that does happen. It's going to do that anyway, because we've got to a final for the first time. So more schools are going to be talking about football. More football clubs are going to be thinking, how do we support the women's team? More grassroots hopefully are able to access more funding. So, it means a lot to a lot of people in different ways. And so we're hoping it goes our way, and that there's a legacy that lives on as a result of this group being able to be at a World Cup final. Brilliant.
Well, let's hope so. It's an exciting new season for Burnley, and the chance to push towards a goal of promotion. As we saw last season with the men's team, it can generate an incredible momentum, can't it? But really interesting to catch up, Lola, and to learn about what's going on the women's side of the club. And good luck for the new season.
Thank you very much, Simon. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.